Welcome everyone, Costini here with my ranking of races in Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires. Now I did a video like this when Immortal Empires came out, but things have changed. Patches have come out, we've got an entire new race and a redesign of the Darklands, and just significant changes in general in the game, though there are still plenty of issues that have been there since the launch of Immortal Empires. Though we do have patch 3.1 coming out, and it does seem like they're going to try and fix a lot of issues with that. Whether or not they resolve the issues for certain races, I would not have my hopes up for that, because I think when it comes to races, they're probably only going to fix races with a paid DLC. Like, it's going to be free for everyone, but they're only going to do so when a free DLC, when a DLC comes out, and it's going to be the free part of that DLC. So for instance, when they do decide to release the DLC that's going to have the Empire, Nurgle, and the Dwarves, they're probably going to rework the Dwarves. Now, let me talk about the cast Dwarves, because I don't have an icon to use for this particular template for them. But I think the cast Dwarves are an easy S tier as a race. They don't start off incredibly strong, and you do actually have to work for it during the course of your campaigns. But that's great. You have a lot of things to manage, be it the political situation through conclave influence, the economic situation involving laborers, materials, and the unit situation involving armaments. And then there's the caravan system as well. There's a lot of things to like about the Cast Dwarf campaign in general, and I think the Cast Dwarves are certainly the best designed race at the moment in the game, because they're not so incredibly strong that they just steamroll everyone from turn one. They have to work for it. Sure, they can reach a very high level of strength later on, but your empire early on is going to be a house of cards that's going to be very easy to destroy, especially since you're dealing with Grimgore in every single Cast Dwarf campaign. It's a really fun concept, like having an entire race where every single campaign has an endgame crisis to it from turn one. So easy S tier for the Cast Dwarves, if maybe even S tier plus or something along those lines. But anyway, for the older races, let's talk about the Beastmen. Now, in terms of faction strength, I would say the Beastmen are an easy A tier or A minus. But in terms of how practical their campaigns are, I'm going to have to put them at C. The problem for the Beastmen really boils down to the following situation. The Beastmen are a good race, but they start off incredibly weak and incredibly limited. And unlike the Cast Dwarves, who have multiple resources to manage, the Beastmen only have one beyond money, and that is Dread. And you're using Dread for a lot. You're using it for unit capacity, you're using it for Legendary Lords, for hero capacity, for Horde armies, what level they are when you recruit them, for Hearthstones. You're making use of that Dread for a lot of things, and the best way to do it in a Beastmen campaign is to save up the Dread, improve the Hearthstones, improve the Horde armies, and then get the Legendary Lords. But that means a lot of your early game, like 20, 30, 40 turns plus, you're basically going to play the campaign with Regiments Renown, your starting army, and a bunch of Ungors, which don't make the Beastmen a good army. So their campaigns, the Beastmen campaigns, are designed in such a way that the early game is incredibly weak. You're going to have to fight a lot of armies manually because your auto-resolve is really bad. And even if it wasn't bad, you'd still probably want to fight those battles manually in order to be able to fight multiple battles in the same turn. This is the issue in Tarax's campaign in particular, but all Beastmen campaigns do allow you to a degree or another to fight multiple battles in the same turn because of the way their movement works once they raise a settlement. So combining those two, like a race that has poor auto-resolve in general, with mechanics that push you towards fighting multiple battles in the same turn, is not a great situation. So that's why the Beastmen, I would argue, even though they are certainly strong, the Beastmen get a C rating. It's the practical implications of what playing a Beastman campaign involves. You're not just going to be able to play a campaign as the Beastman and auto-resolve a lot of the pointless, meaningless battles, and that just lowers them in my eyes. So what I'm doing with this tier list, I'm really considering that aspect as well, as opposed to some of the tier lists that I've done, and the one I did months and months ago talking about the race rankings, because it's not just about strength, it's also about how their campaigns actually play out. getting to Bretonnia, Bretonnia is, I would say, a B tier faction. They could be an A tier race in the game, but they do certainly have issues. But let's look at the benefits. They get artillery very quickly, they have powerful cavalry, they have some of the highest growth in their settlements in the entire game. I think they can compare it to Beastmen. It's a bit ridiculous, though, that the capital of Bretonnia doesn't have the same ridiculous level of growth as regular settlements. I think there's some discrepancies over there, and Bretonnia certainly needs some improvements to it. But they have very high growth. They have an amazing economy, certainly one of the better economies in the game. They have good control, pretty good hero, lord and cavalry choices, and having access to early artillery is a significant benefit in any campaign, because you can use that artillery in sieges very effectively, you can use that artillery in field battles, and all of those things add up to make Bretonnia pretty good on the campaign side of things. They also get a lot of money from sacking settlements. Yes, I know this sounds a bit ridiculous, but Bretonnia actually has one of the highest incomes from sacking settlements. That's because they get a quote-unquote negative trade that costs them chivalry every turn, but you're getting a significant increase to the amount of money you're getting from sacking settlements. Combine that with growth, like Bretonnia is kind of like the Greenskins, like they sack settlements, then they rebuild them very quickly. That's what the Greenskins do very well. But here's the problem. Bretonnia is a cavalry-focused faction. Their range units, not that great. They used to work in Warhammer 2, given the range situation in general and the redesign of settlements, they don't work quite as well. And because they're a cavalry-focused faction, they don't do very well in sieges. Battle Pilgrims and Foot Squires, the only two decent melee infantry units that Bretonnia has, even they are limited in siege battles. So Bretonnia is going to have a lot of issues in their campaign from a practical standpoint in taking over settlements. Field battle-wise, you'll do very well, but in terms of siege battles, you're always limited. Yes, questing knights do work, rail guardians do work, heroes and lords do work, and combine them with artillery, they do work okay, but it's not a great situation to deal with when it comes to a campaign. And siege battles there's going to be a lot of siege battles, partly because the out-resolve in siege battles is skewed against the attacker, partly because the way the out-resolve works, and also because of, well, the layout of a lot of settlements. You know what's also hilarious? Bretonnian settlements themselves, in terms of sieges, they're very cramped. You look at the Empire is amazing to be able to use cavalry in their siege battles. The Bretonnians are not. It is a bit of a weird one. They're also limited because of the vows, and it's always really annoying to have to get a lot of lords and heroes and get their vows to get immortality on them, so they get wounded instead of getting killed, and also reduce the upkeep on those knightly units that you want to get in a Bretonnian campaign. So quite a lot of limitations across the board, limitations in terms of confederation, and the peasant economy is also annoying because while you can get to a point where you don't care about and recruit however many peasants you want because you have so much capacity for them, early on it is an issue. But I do think Bretonnia is certainly in a much better place than quite a lot of races in the game. For the next one, we have the Demons, all of the demonic factions. Now, I'm not going to talk about Nurgle, Tzeentch, or the Demon Prince. I think the vast majority of the player base, like 90% plus of the player base, accepts the fact that Kugav, Kairos, and Demon Prince, Yuri, Daniel are awful legendary lords. But what about Slaanesh? What about Nakari and Khorne, Skarbrand? Well, Nakari can have a lot of fun in his campaign, her campaign, its campaign, their campaign, whatever. Can be a lot of fun having to deal with the Ulfwan situation because you do have the tools needed to succeed in conquering Ulfwan. And you do have the ability of building a massive empire as Slaanesh. But the problem is, once you get past like the first 20, 30 turns, once you deal with Ulfwan, the rest of the campaign is a joke. You're going to have a campaign where you can't really lose because of your vassals, like vassalizing Elfarion, Alariel, and Tyrion. You've won the campaign right there. But you're still in a situation because of the unit roster, because of the out-resolve, because of the poor casualty replenishment, you're going to have to fight a lot of battles manually, and it's not a great experience, nor is really dealing with vassals. The vassal system could be interesting, but the way you control vassals, the way vassals act, is quite problematic at best. I think that Warhammer 3 or Total War in general, could benefit a lot when it comes to its vassal system from something like Nobunaga's Ambition, the way that worked. So you could have these factions that would be under your banner, so to speak. You didn't control them. They were the independent factions. They were your vassals, effectively. But you could take control of their armies for the cost of influence. Now, you do have the allegiance point system, but one, you can't take over their main army. Two, there's still issues with that, and it is still going to be fairly limited, even in the best case scenario. What about Skarbrand? Well, look at Skarbrand. He's a legendary lord that's powerful, can have a good auto-resolve situation, can have good casualty replenishment, so might sound like a great situation for a campaign, except Skarbrand doesn't really have an economy. He's purely dependent on sacking settlements. And here's the thing, there are other races that rely on looting and sacking settlements, the Greenskins, the Dark Elves, etc., but they also have a good, strong base economy. Skarbrand does not have an economy. Skarbrand struggles to hold settlements, and the problem is you're not going to be able to get access to good units, interesting units in the Khorne roster. You're not really going to have an economy to back you up, and your campaign is only going to work as long as you can keep winning battles with Skarbrand. Now, to be fair, it's not easy to necessarily defeat Skarbrand in a campaign for the AI. There's a lot of tricks you can use. But you're going to be in a situation where you're going to have to fight a lot of those battles manually because you want to fight a lot of battles per turn. It doesn't matter what army you have. You're really pushed towards fighting a lot of battles manually. And the problem with that, like with the Beastmen, a lot of the battles are not really that fun to actually play. Like, they're garrison battles or against weak armies that you would just... You just win in 2 minutes or something along those lines, if even that, or in 1 minute in some cases. But that's not a fun and engaging experience at the moment. I hate having to fight a lot of battles. A lot of people hate having to fight a lot of those battles manually. It's an issue with auto-resolve, but for Skarbrand it's even worse because the Blood Host can't take advantage of that casualty replenishment. I think Skarbrand's campaign would actually be a lot more interesting to play if his Blood Host could actually replenish. And if he could also get access to the good units, like who doesn't want to play a campaign of demons and actually use the demonic units? But that's not really what you're going to do in Skarbrand's campaign. You're going to use crap units throughout your entire campaign, guys. Or crap units for a demonic faction. You're going to use Bloodletters, you're going to use Cast Warriors, you're going to use Marauder Horsemen. Like, basically, you get all these units early on. And then you get heroes, and that's pretty much it. That's the only real army you're going to have in your campaign. Getting multiple armies is very difficult as Skarbrand, and it's a lot slower than just getting one powerful army and relying on Blood Hosts, but it's not a fun campaign. Power-wise, sure. I could put Skarbrand as a B, maybe a C, but in terms of like how the campaign plays from a practical standpoint, it's certainly an F as well. I know a lot of people are going to disagree with that, but that's where I stand. Moving on, we get the Dwarves, and the Dwarves are one of the worst races in the game. Like, the only thing that the Dwarves do have is that they have powerful heroes, a powerful army, or some of their unit roster is really good, like the Quarrelers, and the artillery is pretty solid. But their lords do leave quite a bit to be desired, even if they're very difficult to take down, especially if you give them good items in the campaign, because you can get access to those good items faster than anyone else. But the Dwarves are annoying in the best case scenario. They're annoying even if you're doing everything right, because your economy is not as strong as other factions. You're not getting a lot of post-battle income compared to other factions. Like, a faction might get tens of thousands from a settlement. You're going to struggle to get even thousands in your campaign. And on top of that, they have poor growth, they have issues with control, though not in terms of rebellions. They have issues in terms of how control affects their growth. They have limited recruitment slots, and a lot of limitations in their campaign overall. You can make it work, but the Dwarves are certainly going to be a lot slower to achieve the potential that other races, other factions start with. Even with someone like Grombrindal only really has one really good army, and he does have some good faction effects, but he's not really that great. Even him, he's not really that great. He doesn't compare to the campaign situations that the more powerful races have in the game. So the Dwarves, certainly an F tier. I've talked a lot about the issues, and I'm glad that Creative Assembly has finally decided to rework the Dwarves, because they've needed it for a very long time. For the High Elves, easy S tier. They're one of the best races in the game, and what's interesting about the High Elves, they're kind of similar in some ways to the Cast Dwarves. They don't just get a lot of the power that they do have access to for free. They actually have to work for it. You need an economy. You need to trade to make that economy working. You need to get influence, get good lords and good heroes in your campaign. Yes, you can cheese it to a certain extent with save load character system, or you can just use that system in general. But even so, the High Elves have a lot of power, but it's not power given for free. It is power that you have to earn by playing a campaign properly. And I think that's what the campaign in a Total War game should be about. Like, you may start out weak, or you may start out in a limited fashion, but you have the ability of getting much stronger. And here's the thing. It's not like the High Elves are that weak even early on. Their Spearman and Archer meta early on is really good compared to other races. That they'll defeat a lot of the other early game armies that they'll encounter. There's very few factions that can stand up to the High Elf early game armies, and even then, those factions do have some other issues in their campaigns. Like, Spearmen are great line holders, Archers are really great at dealing damage, they do struggle with the armor piercing situation, they do struggle with siege, lack of siege really, but overall the High Elves are in a good state as a race. It would be better if we could get more siege options for them, but overall, High Elves are a pretty good race with great legendary lords, great campaigns overall. Limitations because of the climate, sure, they do have some issues in their campaigns. They're not perfect, but overall I do think they're in a good spot. They're also the kind of race where you have to engage in diplomacy because you need the trade agreements. You also care about getting to a high level of control in your campaigns because that's going to buff your economy to a large extent. But they start out in a good place and they become one of the more powerful races in the game if you get them going. For the Ogres, yeah, F tier as well. Like, actually, if I'm if I'm rearranging these guys, I would say demonic factions are the worst. But the Ogres are a really bad race in their own way. Here's the problem with the Ogres. Their early game roster is not good. The problem is, increasing your hero capacity and getting access to actual good units is difficult. One, because your economy and settlements is going to be very limited, so you're reliant on post-battle loot, on raiding caravans, if you can. Though it's not necessarily the wisest idea when you're right next to Cathay, because guess what? Cathay is going to come for you. And if they come for you, they might actually be wiped out. Like, if you're playing a campaign on Legendary very hard, what's going to happen is the Cathayan factions are generally going to win against the other factions. Very rarely do I see them wiped out or struggling in a significant fashion. It might take them a while, but they will do it. You might completely derail that situation by raiding the caravans and having the Cathayan factions come for you, and they certainly will. And they have a better army than you do, and they'll have more armies than you will. Like, the Ogres are incredibly limited in their campaign because, really, the Ogre camps limit them. The Ogre camps are not defensible. The leaders of the Ogre camps are not proper lords. Like, if it was a Black Ark situation where you could move the camp, which you should, if you could move the camp around the map, especially because of the meat situation that Ogres have to deal with in their campaigns, it would be a lot better. But as it currently stands, the Ogres are very limited. And the Ogre camps themselves, beyond the fact they're not really defensible, while they will generate income, a decent amount of income, or a good amount of income, and buff and increase your hero capacity and give you access to good units, the problem is there's only so many of them, and it takes a long time to actually develop them, because it is going to take longer just because of the way the population surplus system works. It's going to take you longer playing an Ogre campaign to develop those camps than it would for other factions to develop a settlement from the very start. So lots of issues in Ogre campaigns. All of the Warhammer free baseline races do have severe issues in their campaigns. Even Grand Cathay, which is the best of the bunch. Getting to the Greenskins, another easy S tier as well. Now, here's the thing about the Greenskins. Everyone hates you, or most other races do hate you in your campaign, so you're going to have to fight a lot of foes. But this fits the Greenskins perfectly. Like, if you want to see how you can design two different races that are really powerful and well-designed and don't have annoying campaigns and actually have fun campaigns, just look at the High Elves compared to the Greenskins. Both are versatile races, both have good economies, both have great campaigns, but they're very different in the way they play. Like, one of the criticisms I get in a lot of the videos I do is like, oh, you just want every race to be the same. No, I do not want every race to be the same. I want every race to have good campaigns, and the Greenskins have great campaigns. Be it Azak being the conqueror of the Empire, Grom going for Ulfwan, even if Grom has issues in the long term, and that diminishes his campaign. Like, it's a fun campaign to actually have to deal with Ulfwan, and you have all the tools needed to succeed. It's not as annoying as Nakari or as brutal as Nakari's situation. It's fun. Playing the Greenskin campaigns. You have great legendary lords, you have a great hero roster, you have easy access to that hero roster, you have a great baseline economy, you get a lot of money from looting and sacking settlements. You can't trade, and diplomacy is going to be problematic to say the least if you're playing a Greenskin campaign, but you can get a lot of armies that are really good. And the thing is, you have versatility as well. You have siege, that's actually decent in the role it has in terms of like siege battles. You have siege, you have powerful infantry units from early on with nasty skulkers, then going into big guns and black orcs. You have powerful monster units from trolls to stone trolls to rogue idols and giants, of course. Well, giants less so, but giants can fill a role in an army, in particular in siege battles. Don't underestimate the value they might have in a battle. Like, everyone laughs at the giants, but a giant doom stack is obviously not going to work exceptionally well, but of a couple of giants, yeah, they can do something in a battle. They can be useful. But trolls generally are going to be a better to go for. Like, you have good cavalry choices, chariot choices, monster choices, archer choices, infantry choices. The only downside for the Greenskin roster is their lord choices are pretty weak. Not legendary lords, regular lords, the generic lords, they're not that great. But otherwise, like, the Greenskins are in an amazing place. Great, highly versatile, great unit roster, great hero roster, good research tree, just great campaigns overall. It's a lot of fun to play the Greenskins at the moment. We move on to the Lizardmen, and here I'm of two minds over here with the Lizardmen. They're certainly not one of the best races in the game, and I'm tempted to actually put them at C. If we're talking about Oxyotl, yeah, Oxyotl is obviously an A+, maybe even an S tier campaign, though he's still a Lizardman legendary lord. It is amazing how Creative Assembly can take the concept of dinosaurs riding dinosaurs and make it boring, and yet that's how a lot of the Lizardman campaigns feel at the moment. They're limited. They're not limited in the sense that they don't have a powerful unit roster. They're not limited in the sense that they can't get the job done. They're not limited in the sense that you can't win their campaigns or expand across a vast array of territory. They just feel very, very boring, actually, to play. And it's a weird situation. They have a decent economy, not the greatest, but not bad either. They have a decent unit roster, not a bad one, but not the greatest either. I guess that's the best way to describe the Lizardmen. They're kind of a middle-of-the-road faction between some of the best and the very worst, like a C+ or a B-, I'd argue. Like, they have all the tools needed to succeed, but playing them just doesn't feel that great right now in Warhammer 3. Unless we're talking about Oxyotl, but as the exception, not the rule. I mean, it's always fun to get Lord Croak and nuke someone. If you're playing Gorok, sure, that's fun, but there's still severe limitations in their campaigns at the moment. I think they need to make the Lizardmen more interesting to play, and just their campaign mechanics, I'd argue, feel very, very dull at the moment. Then we get, and I'd certainly rank them higher than Beastmen. Then we get the Tomb Kings. Now, with the Tomb Kings, where would I place them? It's a bit of a weird situation, because if you're talking about faction strength, like, the Tomb Kings going to be an easy S tier. But if we're talking about how their campaigns actually play, yeah, I'd also say they're a C. Better than the Beastmen and the Lizardmen, to be sure, but the problem is, the way Warhammer 3 works right now is it's very focused on early game success, because late game, yeah, it's not really that great. It can get really boring if you're playing a race that gets really powerful in the late game and you're just steamrolling everyone. And that's certainly the case with the Tomb Kings. They're really dull to play in the late game because they're just going to have so many armies and disposable armies. The lords can't die. You'll always be able to recuperate to them. The armies don't cost money to recruit, so even if you lose an entire stack or multiple stacks, you'll just be able to easily recover from that, assuming you've built yourself a pretty good empire. The problem in Tomb King's campaign, well, there are several. The Books of Nagash, the whole system of the Books of Nagash sucks in a lot of ways. Like, having to traverse the entire world, having to go to Ulfwan just to get the damn Book of Nagash, not a fun experience. And having to do it with military force, yeah, I'm going to pick a fight with all of Ulfwan. That's a really smart idea. No, not really. Like, Archon can be good in the early game, sure, but he's very boring as a result of it, because, again, you're just steamrolling over everyone and everything. The difference is he's doing it from turn 1. But for other Tomb Kings, you're actually going to be in a situation you have severe army limitations, hero limitations, unit recruitment limitations, so their early game does suck in a lot of ways. Like, they were certainly designed as a race to be stronger if you build it up, but I think right now, given the meta of Warhammer 3, the Tomb Kings have certainly fallen behind, and their campaigns are just not fun to play at the moment. Strength-wise, yeah, late game strength certainly A tier. If we're talking about early game strength, it depends on the legendary lord. Like, Archon is certainly an S tier in terms of early game strength, but just overall, and the campaigns themselves are not that great to actually play. And that does matter. It doesn't matter how good a race looks on paper. If their campaigns are enough good to play, they're not going to be a good race to recommend. Then we get to the Dark Elves, and I would say that the Dark Elves are also an S tier. Now, I know people are going to be furiously typing on this particular subject, but here's what I have to say on this subject. The Dark Elves have all of the prerequisites to be a really fun and engaging and powerful race from early on, but it's not free power either. They do have to get a lot of slaves and maintain a lot of slaves for that entire economy to work. A lot of people do dislike them, so they're going to have issues with war. Even they don't like each other all that much. But here's the thing. The Dark Elves do have a pretty powerful unit roster and a powerful economy. They get good casualty replenishment. They get good income from their settlements, and they can get quite a good amount of income from looting and sacking settlements, and also the slaves to maintain their economy. So they have units with very high armor and leadership, like Black Ark Corsairs in particular, who will do pretty well in auto-resolve. So you're not going to face an annoying situation where you have to fight a lot of meaningless battles in your campaign just to make them work. So there's a lot of things to like about the Dark Elves, the way they're designed as race, the fact you get easy access to heroes, so you can run around with more heroes, which is always fun to do. So there's a lot of things to like. They have power, they have overall pretty good design. I understand that people dislike the way the slave system works for them compared to Warhammer 2. I get it. But I would say overall the Dark Elves are actually in a pretty good spot. They're not ridiculously overpowered broken, but they're also not pathetic, and their campaigns are actually pretty solid overall. So I would say S tier for certain from my perspective. Before I would have ranked them lower, but having actually played a lot of campaigns in the last half year or so, I can certainly say that the one race I keep coming back to again and again and again is the Dark Elves. Like, they just have great campaigns. So do the High Elves, so do the Greenskins. We get to Norsca. Now, Norsca is a weird one, because if we're thinking about like their unit roster, their hero roster, they're actually in a pretty good spot, but their campaigns suck. Their campaigns suck because the mechanics of those campaigns just don't work. You have to decide either sack a settlement, which you need for the income because you're a faction reliant on sacking settlements for income, or dedicate them to a god, raise them in favor of a god, which is not a great dynamic in the campaign. So that doesn't really work all that well. Furthermore, the monster hunts themselves are also really bugged. So that's another mechanic that doesn't work very well for Norsca. And then on top of that, because the Norscan factions hate each other, you're probably going to end up in a war with all of them pretty quickly. If you're playing as Strong or Wolfric, you're probably going to end up in a war with other Norscan factions pretty quickly in your campaign. And you can win that and unify all of Norsca. Congratulations, you just made yourself a target for everyone in the campaign map. And Norsca doesn't have such a great economy that they can maintain very large armies, so you're going to end up having to defend against a large horde of enemies. And because of the fact that Norsca is very vulnerable to sea attacks, and your economy is dependent on ports, what economy you do have is dependent on ports, you're going to face a lot of attacks from virtually everyone else, including many other Chaos factions. So it's a brutal campaign where the tools you have are not sufficient for the task at hand, and it's annoying because the dynamic between raising a settlement and sacking a settlement really hurts your potential in that campaign. And also they're not great in auto-resolve either, because a lot of their units, while certainly powerful in an actual battle, don't really have the highest armor. Trolls will obviously work, but if you're playing as strong, trolls will certainly work, but Marauders, they're not going to do so well in auto-resolve. Going with the Empire also is a terrible race at the moment. See, if it was just like the unit roster, their economy, their growth, I would certainly say the Empire deserves a higher spot, right? Because even though they have a bunch of issues in terms of their unit roster and the sense that their unit roster until tier 3 is awful in every way, shape, or form. I mean, cavalry can work, but in terms of like range units, not that great. And their artillery only starts being useful at tier 4. But those are issues. You could sweep those aside, right? You could deal with that. Certainly, there are other races in the game that don't necessarily have the best unit roster early on, but can have good campaigns. The problem is, and this is why I rank the Empire as an F tier, is that every single Imperial campaign, the mechanics of those campaigns, be it the Books of Nagash, the Imperial Authority, or the Hostility Meter, all of those are freaking terrible. Every single one of them. Every single Imperial campaign is just outright terrible and broken at the moment. Yes, you can gain a lot of power in Marcus Wolfheart's campaign, but just having to deal with the Doomstack spawning again and again and again because of hostility and the control issues he encounters and the limitations of climate does hurt that campaign a lot. And that's actually the best case scenario because at least you have a lot of early game power with Marcus Wolfheart. The other campaigns, I don't even want to talk about how horrible Karl Franz is at the moment because I've already done so. Yeah, he's pretty broken, he's pretty busted. But it's good to know that Creative Assembly is going to rework the Empire as they are going to rework the Dwarves. We'll see what they end up doing. Getting to Kislev, I would say Kislev is in a better spot than the Empire as the D tier. Don't get me wrong, Kislev is still a pretty crappy race. They only avoid being put in F tier for the simple reason that their unit roster early on, like armored Kossars and regular Kossars, are actually okay. They have great casualty replenishment through Patriarchs. And the Legendary Lord selection itself is not that bad either. Boris Ursus is certainly a really powerful Legendary Lord in the game. But the Kislev economy is very limited early on. Kislev itself as a territory does suck. You can do pretty well though playing Boris Ursus. Here's the difference though. At least Kislev has one good campaign as Boris Ursus, whereas the Empire has no good campaign whatsoever. And the weaknesses that Kislev have are not as bad as the Dwarves have. Like the Dwarves might have one better army than Kislev. Kislev might have 3 armies. You can also earn a lot of money from post-battle loot, sacking, and looting settlements. Unlike the poor, miserable Dwarves and their campaigns, you can make a campaign as Kislev actually work. The main issue I would say is that they lack artillery, but they have ways of getting around that. Even if it is annoying to have to just park all your Kossars outside the settlement and kill everything on the walls and then move into the settlement, at least it does function. At least their campaigns are playable, but make no mistake, their campaigns are still pretty awful, just not as bad as the ones in F tier. Then we have Grand Cathay. Grand Cathay is a B tier race, I would say. They could be higher. Like Grand Cathay does have a great unit roster, does have good Legendary Lords, does have a good amount of power in their campaigns, but climate limitations do limit the potential in their campaigns by quite a lot. Lacking replenishment does limit, lacking hero replenishment does limit their campaign potential by quite a lot as well. And then the whole harmony mechanic and the Great Compass, the compass of Grand Cathay, they're just worthless mechanics. Like with the compass, you're always going to want to get that massive income benefit and nothing else because it's just that much better. And the whole idea that, oh, you're getting rogue armies to spawn to attack the Great Bastion, it was really annoying in Realms of Chaos. Now it's basically meaningless because it's very easy to get to a point where you're just auto-resolving against those armies. It's pretty annoying to deal with the Grand Cathay campaign from that perspective. But they do work. That's the thing. Like, this is the thing about both Bretonnia and Grand Cathay, because they're in a similar spot. Like, they have a lot of things that do make them work. Like, Grand Cathay has a great army roster with high levels of armor that will do pretty well in most battles and encounters. It has good artillery. It has good units overall. Even if it's limited, it's the only race of the Realms of Chaos baseline races that actually works pretty damn well in the game right now. But there's so many strings attached to a Cathay campaign because of the climate situation, the meaningless aspect of the harmony system and the compass system, just so many limitations right now that you can't really place them higher, but they at least are playable. Yes, we're going to rank them based on that. Every race is technically playable. You can win a campaign as every Legendary Lord. That doesn't mean they're good. Cathay can at least be serviceable, if you will. in a long campaign. They can work, and they can work pretty well, actually. Once you get full armies of Jade Warriors, crossbowmen with shields, and hero capacity, yeah, you're going to start doing pretty well, despite all the limitations you're going to face, with climate especially. Going for the vampire counts, I wish I had the Vlad faction icon over here, because I hate Manfred, like most other people, but the vampire counts are an A-tier race. Now, don't get me wrong on this. The vampire counts are awful in terms of their auto-resolve, but that's actually the only major issue that the vampire counts do have. They have good units. They have a great lord and hero rosters. They have great legendary lords overall. They get a good amount of income very, very easily in their campaigns, and they can recruit really powerful units pretty damn quickly through the raised dead mechanic. So there's a lot of things to like. The only major downside of the vampire counts, beyond the fact that they don't have artillery, which limits their potential in siege, but that doesn't matter. You can handle just smashing all your units or just your lords through the gates and killing everything in sight. You can make that work. The biggest issue, I would say, for the vampire counts, and the thing that keeps them down, is their auto-resolve situation. Their auto-resolve is bad, even by the standards of Warhammer 3. The only reason they're not worse off is because they actually get good replenishment, really good replenishment, so that keeps them going, but it is still a pretty awful situation to deal with in a campaign. Like, I wish I could rank them S tier, because in a lot of ways, like when we're looking at Lord Strength, Legendary Lord Strength, Hero Selection, etc., they should be an S tier faction, but just that auto-resolve situation does severely limit their campaigns in a lot of ways. Vampire corruption can be annoying as well, but believe it or not, the vampire counts actually have a lot of diplomatic options with a lot of their neighbors, and they can also vassalize factions through diplomacy, like play Vlad and vassalize Ungram. Yes, you can do it. It is hilarious when you do it. But just from a practical standpoint, the vampire counts do have issues. But if you are willing to put up with the fact that you may have to fight a decent number of battles, even then, you won't have to fight every battle, and your armies can be considered disposable. Like, who cares about higher ranked zombies ultimately in a campaign? That's unless you're Gorst, and even as Gorst, you don't necessarily care about them too much. So if you can get a lot of armies with higher tier units, the auto-resolve situation does actually improve. That's the thing. It's not a Scarbrand situation, because with Scarbrand or the Beastmen, you're always going to have to fight a lot of manual battles. At least with the vampire counts, you can avoid that at a certain point in your campaign. Going for the Skaven, also an A-tier race. Great economy, great campaign potential, great hero selection, great unit roster, lots of power. Annoying to have to fight a lot of battles manually, but again, like the vampire counts, you can get to a point as the Skaven to avoid that, and their armies are ridiculously strong on the battlefield. Lots of potential, good legendary lord selection, for the most part, with the major exception of Tretch. It is a shame Frot and Ikeclaw suffer because of their poor start positions, but overall, the Skaven are a really fun, powerful race. They're just not as good as High Elves, Greenskins, or Dark Elves, because, yeah, you're going to have to fight a lot of battles, but you're going to have to fight a lot more battles playing as a Skaven than you would as the top 3 races in the game at the moment. Vampire Coast, F tier. Easy, F tier. Not as bad as Demons, but still pretty bad. It is amazing how you take an undead faction with gunpowder units and make it easily one of the worst factions of the game. Like, you want to know what makes the vampire counts so bad? Their land economy is awful. Their dealing with coves is not really that great either, because it means someone has to control those coves, at the very least. Their hero capacity is tied to those pirate coves, so yay, having to leave another faction to control territory that you might want, because that's the way you increase your hero capacity in a campaign. Not a great system at all. Their entire unit roster, with the exception of depth guard and artillery, is worthless in a lot of ways, because all those zombie units the Vampire Coast has, they're just gonna get obliterated in both auto-resolve and manual battles. Like, if you're playing Vampire Coast, you never want to send your army in a settlement unless you have depth guard or Sartosa companies, or man-eaters if you're playing Sartosa. The reason you don't want to send them is they'll just be annihilated by all the towers, barricades slowing them down, and their range is really poor. And gunpowder units do suck at the moment in the game, so even worse off for the Vampire Coast. And the whole thing about Necrofex Colossi, yeah, Necrofex Colossi are a disappointment as a tier 5 unit that they are. So lots of issues in their campaigns at the moment. Can earn a good amount of income. You can play a campaign as them as pirates, sure, that can work. But it is a really, really frustrating experience to play a race where, yes, the lords and heroes are good, the artillery is good, but the army itself is like, just throw it in the trash. That's how worthless their entire army is. And I have to say, there is no other ranking a race like this deserves when where like 90% of their entire army roster, or like outside of artillery, is just worth throwing into the trash. That's how bad the situation is for them. Warriors of Chaos. Warriors of Chaos, D tier. Before you start typing furiously, let's be very clear. In terms of faction strength, ease of campaigns, yeah, Warriors of Chaos are one of the strongest, if not the strongest race in the game, without a doubt. In terms of how fun and good the campaigns are, they deserve an F tier, to be quite blunt. They're really, really boring. It is not fun to just steamroll everything and everyone from turn 1. It is not fun dealing with the vassal system. It is not fun to just have a very dull campaign where every time you encounter an enemy, you just steamroll. Because if you're playing a Warriors Chaos campaign, you're not concerned about the strength of your opponents unless you're playing Kolek and trying to vassalize Grungor early on. But that's just it, really. That's the level of challenge. That's only a level of challenge in your entire campaign. Vassalize everyone, confederate other legendary lords if you're playing as Be'lakor and Archaon, and just obliterate all your foes. It can be fun to a certain extent, especially as Be'lakor, as you teleport around the map. Sure, but overall, like the Warriors of Chaos campaigns are just really boring. It is astounding that they did an amazing job at Rework. They had some really interesting mechanics that other races could benefit from, like the Warband upgrade system, the whole Dark Fortress system. They did a lot of good things in the DLC with the Champions of Chaos, with the rework, but they just ended up making the Warriors of Chaos one of the most boring races to play in the entire game. Not bad, not weak, but just really, really dull. And I think a lot of people will agree with that sentiment, that the Warriors of Chaos are just not really fun to play at the moment. I mean, I would recommend playing a couple of campaigns on them. You might enjoy that to a certain extent, but once you start playing a lot of campaigns, they will be very dull very quickly. Can be fun in like the short term, but after that they just get really, really dull. And I've played quite a few campaigns as these guys. With Elves, also D tier. It's for the same reasons, the exact same reasons, with the exception of the vassals. Wood Elves are a powerful race, one of the most powerful broken races in the game, but their campaigns are dull as shit. Like, doesn't matter who you're playing with. Like, Orion might have a harder early game situation, but once you get steamrolling as Orion, no one's going to be able to stop you. And that's the thing. Their campaigns are awful to play. How you take the tree spirits that Tolkien originally thought about, like, right, the walking trees that are utterly terrifying, how you make that boring is pretty astounding, but they did. I mean, I wish I could give Creative Assembly credit for the Wood Elves because they have a unique campaign. They're a more defensive-oriented race. You don't have to conquer the whole map as them. You don't have to expand across the vast empire to win their campaigns. You have a lot of flexibility to teleport on their campaign. So all that should be fun, except it's not, because your settlements, like the Warriors of Chaos, are unbreachable. I can't even really think of the last time any of my Wood Elf settlements, the big trees, when any of them ever got attacked. And this is on Legendary. Sure, if it's an endgame crisis right next door, sure, that they would get attacked. But exception of that, like outside of the events that the Wood Elves have to deal with, and those events are just a cakewalk to deal with, outside of those kind of events, you're never going to face any level of challenge, any competition in a Wood Elf campaign. So yes, the power is there. It exists. They're strong, they're powerful, they're competent, they have a great army roster. They have some of the best infantry in the game, some of the best monster units in the game, the best archers in the game, good flying units, good research. They can engage in diplomacy, etc., etc. But it's just so mind-numbingly boring to play a Wood Elf campaign. And it's a pretty sad state of affairs with the Wood Elves, because it's like the Warriors of Chaos. Both of these races are not badly designed. They have everything you think you'd want in a package. But we just end up in this situation where having a campaign where you've won the moment you started it is not fun. That's where I stand on that issue. Like, don't get me wrong, you can enjoy yourself just obliterating everyone as Draco or Durfo. Don't get me wrong, that can be fun. But it's not necessarily a race people are going to go back to play again and again. And that's the thing. about the races you go back to. Like, I personally do enjoy playing a lot of High Elves, Greenskins, Dark Elves, Skaven, not so much Vampires, but all these races, and even Grand Cathay can be a lot of fun. But Wood Elves, I hate playing Wood Elves, and I think a lot of people also dislike playing Wood Elves because it's one of those situations where they're just too strong. Like, this is the thing about the Chaos Dwarves. That's why they're such the best race, because they're strong, but you have to work for it. You have to put in effort. You have to consider your strategies. You're not just going YOLOing the entire campaign, obliterating everyone in your path. That's the problem for Warriors of Chaos and Wood Elves. And that's all there is to it. Costine signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications, and stay tuned for more.